Welcome back to Chicago Crossing Model Railroad. Eric here with you as always, and as you can tell, I've been busy making garbage. You know, N scale is not always easily lent toward making these tiny little detail items, but when you manage to do so, I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it adds a lot to the scenery and to the feel of a layout. So I wanted to talk a little bit about dioramas versus scenes versus just stuff on a layout. None of this is meant to be expert opinion. I am by definition in many ways a beginner, so I can tell you what suits me and what I think about, but I wouldn't take it as being any kind of axiom or real advice. It's simply what motivates me on my railroad, and what motivates you on your railroad will no doubt be different, and I think that's great. That's why we all have different railroads. So I'm a Chicagoan by birth and extraction, and Chicagoans have also played significant roles in the perfection of the concept of the diorama. If any of you were military modelers back in the day, like I was when I was early in my teens, then probably you picked up a book by Shepard Payne at some point or another, or maybe you've actually seen his dioramas. Shep Payne lived in Illinois. He actually lived in northwest Chicago, and he was probably one of the founding parental figures of the common conception of a military diorama. So I used to go to the library and rent out Shep Payne's books. He had more than one about making military dioramas, and a lot of that stuff sort of holds true for making dioramas on railroads. What a diorama really is it's basically a series of clues that, when you put it together in a visual way, it tells a story about a place or a time. And so what that means is it's really a set of collected and focused visual elements that help you to essentially deduce what is happening or in a place. So in other words, it gives you sort of the storytelling elements, right? The who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. And on Chicago Crossing, what I strive for, can't say I necessarily always achieve it, but certainly what I strive for, is to create focused areas. So not just everywhere. I think layouts kind of need some room to breathe. You need some areas where the eye can just kind of relax and that you're not bombarded with clues, but rather to create little areas of storytelling within the world of the layout that can provide interest, that if you focus on it, then you can sort of dig in and learn a little bit more about that area and come up with a story in your own mind about how the particular building or the particular industry is working. And so I think there's a lot of clues there that you can place that help to guide a viewer into thinking about a specific part of the layout in a specific way. And they may come up with their own clues. So for instance, this layout is in Chicago. It's in the mid-90s. If you lived in Chicago in the mid-90s, you kind of know what Chicago was like. In many ways, a lot of parts of Chicago still are like that. It's a gritty, dirty, wonderfully diverse and interesting city. So this little currency exchange corner is in many ways a great example of the beginning process of putting together what I think is a diorama. In other words, a series of connected clues that help to tell a story, the who, what, where, when, and why of a particular place. And so if you look at the building, this is one of these older kits. And previous editions of Chicago Crossing, you've just seen a plain old building. After a while, I added in the burglar bars. That gives you kind of a first clue as to the nature of the building. The same with the fact that all the windows are boarded up there. Those were modifications I just put in maybe in the last couple of months or so. And that was because I looked at this building. It's prominent. It's got this big old, copper-clad turret. but it didn't tell a story. It didn't really say anything. You didn't know anything about that building versus if it were located in a small town out in the middle of rural Illinois or something like that. So how do you get the building to tell a story? Well, first of all, you have to create your own story about the building. And so that's what I did, is I created a story where this building houses a currency exchange. It's in a working class neighborhood. The owners of the building have elected to, instead of renting out apartments, and maybe that's because there's roof damage or simply because it's no longer up to code, they have simply boarded up the windows, so the upstairs is vacant. There's no apartments, no people looking out onto the street below to create that kind of sense of safety that you get when you have people who live up in buildings like this one, where you have surveillance or eyes on the street, so to speak. The other aspect of it is these burglar bars help to indicate that, yeah, this building is kind of shut up and it's in a neighborhood that might be a little bit rougher. And, you know, it's a kind of a corner business. It has a collection of these newspaper bins, or these newspaper things here. And then more recently, I've started putting up, you know, this set of concert posters here. It's a vacant doorway, so it's been boarded up, and so it's just been covered over with all of these different concert posters and posters of other stuff. And then you also have the signage that I've just been adding, and I'll talk more about this light up sign situation in a different video. That's been an interesting experiment, to say the least, to figure out how the heck to do that. But then the other component of it is over here, this garbage pile. And basically what that is, as you saw in the previous part of the video, it's a couple of 3D printed trash bins. One of those trash bins got modified so that the lid is flipped open and it's flipped over. There's trash bags out there, a piece of pizza, a bunch of boxes, a couple of pieces of lumber, stuff like that. And again, it helps to basically just create a little sense of a clue about the fact that there's nobody there really keeping an eye on that. You know, the proprietors of the currency exchange are not out there sweeping the walkway and getting rid of that overturned trash. It's basically just sitting there. And so especially given this location of the building, it's right on the corner, it's the last building, it's close to the center of the layout, it just helps tell a story about the degree of neglect of this property and the fact that it's essentially used just for this currency exchange business. And so it really provides that story that helps to give you a sense of place and time, you know, for this building. And I like that. To me, this is a great example of something that is emerging as a diorama. You could look at the building almost as if it was in a shadow box. You know, if you go back to the Shep Payne idea of basically focusing the viewer into a diorama that's actually just contained within a shadow box, as if you're peering in in the middle of a scene. And so I think of this building in the same way. Yeah, it integrates with the rest of the buildings on the block, and so you can kind of think of it as how big the shadow box is. But for a diorama, the way I think about it is, if you took this building and took its surrounding scenery and basically just put it in isolation in a shadow box, would somebody get it? Would you know what was happening or where that building was, or be able to tell a story? And so what I'm working on here is basically to be able to tell that story using the building, and to think of it as essentially being within its own shadow box. And that if you look at it, you can tell enough about it so that it resonates with you, or at least it helps to tell something that you're potentially interested in as a viewer of the layout. So I thought it might be useful, just as a point of comparison, to look at something on the layout that I don't think is a diorama yet. It's something that I want to be, but it really is still just kind of a collection of objects or buildings or, you know, stuff, and it doesn't really tell a story. And that is the Finkel steel plant that you see right here. It's got maybe a couple beginning elements of something that could be a diorama. Like, you can start to tell, yeah, this is probably a steel mill over here. But it's still just a collection of buildings, and it's got some equipment laying out there that tells you a little bit about what it is. So you get the what, but you don't really get anything else. You don't get the who, the why, the where, etc. And so to me, that's like a great distinction. If you were to take this building and put it into a shadow box on its own, would you really be all that interested? And would it really tell a story or provide a narrative for you? And I think at this stage, well, the answer is no. There's not enough information. There's not enough clues there that really tell you, where is this building? Why is this building here? More about the condition of the building. What's the name of the company? There's nothing on there yet that indicates that it is Finkel Steel. So you wouldn't know this versus any other type of industrial site on any layout anywhere, with the exception of just what's beginning to nucleate the diorama, which is this railroad crane and these 3 ladles on their trolleys. So as I think about how to make Finkel Steel better, well, part of what's going to happen is, this building here, this stuff here, that's going to go, and it's going to be a scratch build of the actual Finkel building. It'll be scaled down, of course, because I don't have enough room to put half of what was on that campus in this area. But also, this area here needs to start telling a story, as does the building itself. This is a nice building in terms of its detail. There's rust and all sorts of weathering. But again, it's still not enough to actually tell a story that I think a viewer would be interested in. I think if somebody were looking at the layout, they would probably pass this stuff over, and instead they would probably come over to, something like over here, the abandoned industry, where you have all sorts of little storytelling elements in it. You have the rusted out car, these rusted out containers. If you come over here, you've got the buried track, showing that this used to be a rail-served industry. The containers are all on top of that. The concrete is all heavily weathered. There's a bunch of grass growing. It's very clear the building is no longer used. You have a name for the company. You have all sorts of litter and things like that. So again, you can look over to Finkel here, and you could say, what is that? It's nicely done. I think it's a well-built building, and the models on there look pretty nice, but it doesn't necessarily draw the eye because it doesn't really draw the mind. I think, something more like over here on the layout, the little industry area and stuff like that does a better job of it. And, that's exactly the same sort of thing that I'm trying to shoot for over in this corner with the currency exchange. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense of how I think about developing some of the little stories here on Chicago Crossing, and how I think about what details I include on the layout. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more information about how I think about this sort of thing, and why I spent some time, building in a garbage pile over there. All right, that's it for today. Take care.